40 motorcycles parked in a single line along the length of Garrison Street in Clarksville, Tennessee, on a Saturday morning in July was not something that Block had ever seen before. Not the hardware store. Not the barbershop with the pole that still turned. Not the diner on the corner with the handwritten specials board in the window that had not changed its font since 1987. None of them had seen anything like it. 40 bikes nose to curb, chrome catching the early sun. Their riders standing or leaning in silence the way men stand when they have arrived somewhere with a purpose and are waiting for whatever comes next. The people on that sidewalk stopped. They looked. Some of them took out their phones. Nobody had organized a rally. Nobody had put out a call. It started 3 hours earlier, on this same stretch of sidewalk, when a 78-year-old man in a veteran's cap was walking to the barbershop for a haircut he got every other Saturday, without fail. And a stranger did something to him in front of a dozen witnesses that not one of those witnesses moved to address. Nobody except the man on the motorcycle who had been sitting outside the diner with a cup of coffee and happened to be watching. His name was Trace Mullen, and by the time he made one phone call, 40 riders were on their way to Garrison Street. Clarksville sits on the Cumberland River in Montgomery County, Tennessee, 45 miles northwest of Nashville, and it has been a military town since before most of its buildings were built. Fort Campbell is 8 miles south, and the presence of the base has given Clarksville a particular texture that you do not find in towns its size elsewhere. A population that turns over every few years as soldiers rotate in and out, layered over a bedrock of families who have been there for generations and who remember every version of the town that has come and gone. The result is a place that holds both things at once, the transience and the permanence, and navigates between them with the specific self-possession of a community that has seen enough change to know what it actually values. What it values, among other things, is its veterans. Garrison Street runs 3 blocks through the older part of downtown, parallel to the river, lined with the kind of small businesses that have survived by being useful to people who know them, rather than interesting to people who do not. The hardware store has been in the same family for 3 generations. The diner, Mabel's, though Mabel herself had been gone for 12 years, opened at 6 and closed at 2 and had a reputation that extended well beyond the block, partly because of the biscuits, and partly because the man who ran it, a retired sergeant named Cooper, maintained the same standards for his dining room that he had once maintained for his quarters. You sat up straight at Mabel's. You did not take calls at the table. You left the booth the way you found it. It was outside Mabel's, on the sidewalk, where Trace Mullen had been sitting on an August-worn wooden bench with a paper cup and the particular grateful stillness of a man who has been on the road since 5 and has finally stopped. Trace was 48 years old. He was from Bowling Green, Kentucky, out of the Pennyrile chapter, and he had been riding since dawn toward a memorial service in Nashville for a brother named Lou who had died in April, an aneurysm, in his driveway at 61, which was 12 years too soon and the kind of thing that the chapter had not yet fully absorbed. Trace had Lou's name on a piece of tape inside his helmet, a habit he had started in his 30s and maintained as the list had grown. He did not want to forget the names when he was riding. The road had a way of taking things from you if you did not hold them. He was 6'1", 195 pounds, with a cut that had been earned over 22 years and a face that looked like the outdoors had used it for a workshop. When he walked into Mabel's that morning, at 8 o'clock, the 2 men at the counter had moved their stools slightly without appearing to notice they had done so. He had ordered coffee to go and come back outside because the bench was there and the morning was not yet hot, and he wanted 20 minutes of the sidewalk and the river sound 2 blocks over before he got back on the highway. He had been sitting there for 11 minutes when he saw the old man coming down the street. His name was Earl Briggs. He was 78 years old, and he had been getting his hair cut at the barber shop on Garrison Street every other Saturday for 23 years, since the year after he retired from the Army after 31 years of service. Infantry, 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 in the Gulf, a career that had taken him from a farm boy in Robertson County to a man who had seen more of the world than he had ever intended to, and had come home quiet about most of it. He wore his veteran's cap every time he left the house. Not for attention, because it was his. Because a man who had given what he had given had the right to carry it plainly, and he had decided a long time ago that he would not be modest about his service on behalf of the men who had given more of theirs than he had. He was 5'8" and slight in the way that men who were once solid sometimes go slight in their 70s, the mass reduced, but the posture unchanged. Still upright, still deliberate, still covering ground with purpose, even at a pace that had slowed from what it once was. He had a cane he had used for 2 years since the knee replacement, a metal one that he had wrapped with a piece of paracord near the grip because bare metal in July was hot to hold. His wife Frances had wrapped it for him. She had been gone for 4 years. He walked the same route every other Saturday, 4 blocks from the house on Dillard Street, left on Garrison. The barber shop was the 3rd door. He knew the hardware store owner by his first name. He knew Cooper at Mabel's, who always had a coffee ready when he passed the window and left it on the outdoor sill so Earl did not have to come in and wait. He was reaching for the coffee on the sill when the man stepped out of the parking lot. He was not from Clarksville. That was the first thing Trace registered. Not a detail he could have explained immediately. More an accumulation of specifics that added up to someone passing through. The rental car plates, the shoes that were wrong for July heat, the phone in his hand held at shoulder height in the practiced way of someone recording something for the entertainment of people elsewhere. He was in his 30s, broad, wearing a shirt with the collar open, and he had the ease of a man whose day had not included consequences yet. He saw Earl reaching for the coffee on the windowsill. He said something. A sentence. Loud enough that the people nearby turned to look. A woman outside the hardware store, a couple crossing the street, a teenager on a bicycle who stopped pedaling and put a foot down. What he said was about the cap. It was contemptuous and specific, and it reached back across 50 years to a political argument that men like him had decided veterans of a certain war deserved to be part of. And he said it with the smile of someone who had always found that soldiers were easy targets on quiet Saturday mornings, because soldiers had been trained to maintain composure, and composure could be mistaken for acceptance. Earl did not look at him. He picked up the coffee. He set his cane. He turned to continue down the sidewalk. The man stepped in front of him. And then he spat. Not at him. Close enough. On the sidewalk, directly in Earl's path, with deliberate aim, looking at him the entire time. It was not the act of someone who had lost his temper. It was the act of someone who had done it before and understood exactly what it communicated, that a man's dignity could be treated as something to step in. The woman outside the hardware store looked at her phone. The couple crossing the street looked at each other and kept walking. The teenager on the bicycle looked at the ground. Earl Briggs stood still. His hand on the cane was white at the knuckles. He did not look at the man in front of him. He looked at a point past him, down the street. The way a man looks when he has made a decision about where his eyes are going to be, and that decision is a discipline he is not going to break. Trace Mullen had set his coffee down. He had not moved yet. Not because he was uncertain. He had stopped being uncertain the moment the man stepped in front of Earl, but because he understood something that the man in the open-collared shirt did not understand, which was that what was about to happen would be much more effective if it was not rushed. He watched Earl's hand on the cane. He watched the man say something else, shorter this time, delivered as the man turned to leave. The kind of thing that is meant to land in a person's back as they walk away, designed to follow them. Earl's posture did not change. His back was still straight. His pace was still deliberate. But his free hand, at his side, had closed into a fist. Trace stood up. He was not quick about it. He unfolded from the bench the way a thing unfolds when it is large and unhurried and already certain of what it is going to do, and he stepped off the curb and walked across the sidewalk with his hands loose at his sides and stopped beside Earl. He did not look at the man in the open collared shirt. He looked at Earl. "Sir," he said, "can I walk with you?" Earl looked at him. At the cut, at the patches. "You don't have to," Earl said. "I know," Trace said. They walked together toward the barber shop. 3 steps. That was as far as they got before the man in the open-collared shirt said something to Trace's back. The same way he had said something to Earl's back, the same delivery, the same performance for the phone he was still holding at shoulder height. Trace stopped. He did not turn quickly. He turned the way water turns, all at once, without urgency. He looked at the phone first, then at the man. "Put the phone down," he said. The man smiled. "Free country," he said. "Put the phone down," Trace said again. Quieter. The man looked at Trace's cut. At the death head on the back that was visible now from this angle, his smile held, but something behind it had shifted. A small recalculation, the first one he had made all morning. "I'm not doing anything," he said. Trace did not say anything. He stood there in the July heat on the sidewalk on Garrison Street and looked at the man with the particular patience of someone who has nothing to prove and nowhere to be, and has been waiting for this moment since before he stopped being uncertain. The man held the phone up a second longer. Then he put it in his pocket. "Good," Trace said. He turned back to Earl. Earl was watching him with an expression that had not simplified into anything, not relief, not gratitude, something older and more complicated than either, the expression of a man who had waited a long time to see what he had just seen and had not been sure he was going to. "Barbershop," Trace said. "Barbershop," Earl said. They walked. Nobody in that block moved. Nobody said a word. The man in the open-collared shirt stood on the sidewalk and watched them go, and the phone stayed in his pocket. And the morning was very bright and very still, and somewhere 2 blocks over the Cumberland River moved the way it always moved, which was without any particular concern for what was happening on Garrison Street. Trace held the door for Earl. Earl went in. Trace stood in the doorway for a moment. He took out his phone. He called his road captain. His name was Dex Yarborough, and what Trace told him took less than 2 minutes, and when it was done, Dex said, "What's the address?" Trace told him. He went inside. The barber's name was Anthony Reeves, and he had been cutting Earl's hair for 23 years, and he had seen the thing on the sidewalk through the window, and had come around the counter when Earl came in, and had put his hand on Earl's shoulder and said, "I saw it." And Earl had nodded once, which was all he was going to say about it, and sat in the chair. And Anthony had put the cape around his neck, and they had talked about the heat and Earl's garden and whether the county fair was worth the drive anymore, which it probably was not. And the familiar weight of that conversation was doing what it always did, which was carry a man through the part of the morning he needed to be carried through. Trace sat in the waiting chair along the wall with his helmet in his lap. Earl had not asked him to stay. He had not asked him to leave either. Trace had sat down, and that had been the end of it. They were 20 minutes into the haircut when the sound started. Low first, then growing, the way a sound grows when it is coming from multiple sources, and the sources are converging. The windows of the barber shop picked it up as a vibration before it became identifiable. A hum in the glass, a tremor in the combs on the counter, the kind of frequency that a body registers before a mind processes it. Earl looked at the window. Then he looked at Trace. Trace was looking at the door with the first real expression he had shown all morning, which was a quiet one, private, not performed. "What is that?" Earl said. Anthony Reeves was looking at the window. "I don't know," Anthony said, "but it's a lot of something." They came around the corner from Riverside Drive in a formation that was 2 bikes wide and 20 deep, and then more, the chrome catching the morning sun in long horizontal flashes, and the sound of them filled the street from building front to building front, in a way that made the air feel different, heavier, inhabited by something that had not been there before. Garrison Street went silent in the way that a place goes silent when it is trying to understand what it is looking at. 41 motorcycles. They pulled in nose to curb with the precision of men who had done this before and knew how to take up space with purpose. And the engines killed one by one, the sound tapering down like a wave receding until the street held nothing but their presence and the ticking of hot metal in the July heat. Nobody spoke. Not one of them. They sat or stood beside their bikes and they looked at the barber shop. The couple who had crossed the street without acting had come back. The woman from the hardware store was at the edge of the curb. The teenager on the bicycle had not gone anywhere. He was standing with his bike leaning against the wall, and he was looking at the line of chrome with his mouth slightly open. Inside the barber shop, Anthony Reeves had put the comb down. Earl Briggs was looking through the glass. Trace Mullen stood up from the waiting chair, put his helmet on the seat, and opened the door. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. The man closest to the door was Dex Yarborough, 46, road captain, a man with a gray braid and the squared shoulders of someone who had organized things for a long time and taken the job seriously. He was looking at Trace. "Took us a while to find parking," Dex said. Trace almost smiled. "Appreciate you coming," he said. Dex looked past him through the barbershop window at the old man in the barber's chair with the cape still around his neck. "That him?" he said. "Yes," Trace said. Dex was quiet for a moment. His expression changed, not dramatically, just a settling, the way a face settles when it has found the thing it came for. "Somebody ought to go in and tell him," Dex said. "Tell him what?" Trace said. "That there's 41 bikers on this street who'd like to shake his hand," Dex said. "If he's willing." The man in the open-collared shirt had not gone far. He was at the far end of the block near his rental car, and he saw the motorcycles arrive, and he watched Trace come out of the barber shop, and he watched Dex Yarborough and the exchange that followed. He did not have his phone out. He did not film any of it. He got into his car and left. His exit took 4 seconds. He did not deserve more. Earl Briggs came out of the barber shop with his new haircut and his cane and his veteran's cap, and he stood on the sidewalk in front of 41 parked motorcycles and the men and women standing beside them. And he was very still for a moment. Dex extended his hand. Earl shook it. He shook 41 hands that morning, slowly, down the line, each one offered with the same quiet respect, not performance, not spectacle, just men and women who had come to a street on a Saturday morning to stand beside someone who deserved to have someone stand beside him. One of the riders, a woman from a chapter in Nashville named Clara, had a small American flag on the antenna of her bike. She unpinned it and held it out to Earl. Not a ceremony, just here. Earl looked at it. He took it. He held it in his free hand the whole way down the line. When it was done, Trace was the last one. "You didn't have to do all this," Earl said. "No," Trace said. "We didn't." He said it plainly. That was the point. Trace left Garrison Street at 11:15, back on Route 79 south toward Nashville, back toward the memorial for Lou, whose name was on the tape inside his helmet. He was going to be late. He had called ahead, and Dex had passed it along, and the chapter understood, the way chapters understand these things, which is without requiring an explanation. He did not think of himself as having done anything unusual. A man had been humiliated on a public street. Another man had seen it and stood beside him. One phone call had done the rest. The rest, as it turned out, was 41 people who did not need to be persuaded that a veteran's dignity was worth an hour on a Saturday morning. They came because it was obvious that they should. They left when it was done. The flag from Clara's antenna was in Earl's front pocket when he walked the 4 blocks home to Dillard Street. He put it on the mantel when he got in, beside the photograph of Frances in her summer dress and the photograph of himself in country in 1968, which was a photograph he did not look at often, but also never put away. He stood in front of all of it for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen and made lunch, because it was past noon, and he was hungry, and because life continued in the way that life continues, ordinary, persistent, made up mostly of small things that you do one after another, and occasionally of something that lands on the mantel and stays. There is a particular kind of man who mistakes composure for permission. He finds someone who has been taught to hold themselves still in the face of indignity, and he reads the stillness as an invitation, because he has never met the thing that was going to correct that reading. He met it on a Saturday morning on Garrison Street. He did not see it coming. He never saw the 40 bikes around the corner. He never understood that the man on the bench outside the diner was not just a man on a bench, that he was the first point of a line that ran back through 2 decades of brotherhood, and that line did not require a reason to show up. It only required a phone call. One call. 41 bikes. One flag on a mantel in Clarksville, Tennessee. That is not a remarkable story. That is just what respect looks like when it decides to make itself visible. If this story reached you, if you believe that a veteran's dignity is worth 41 bikes on a Saturday morning, share it with someone who needs to remember that the debt this country owes its veterans is not abstract. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Do you have a veteran in your life you want to honor? Tell me their name. Tell me their branch. I read every single one, and today I want to hear about them.